information just to drive the point home is that property owners or lessees, operators, have to opt in to these charges. We're not creating a new authority with carte blanche to levy fees and taxes in any way it wants. We are setting a ceiling for what could possibly happen in the future, and property owners are required to opt in to what these charges are. Those charges can include parking fees.
Are allowed to opt in.
Are allowed to opt in. Correct. Are allowed to opt in. Those charges include parking fees, food and beverage fees, hotel and motel fees, property value charges. Think of it like a SID, but with a lot more flexibility. We're not relying solely on property tax. There's other sort of charges that can be included. An NCA is geographically defined through a petition process. That's what we're going through right now. We'll talk about the geography in a second. Again, can assess charges only if property owners or users opt in. And it uses funds collected from charges within the NCA area to support the development of that district. So that's an important point to mention as well. Different than, say, a TIF district. With an NCA, what you're spending the money on can only be within the NCA district as well. This is not a new tool across the state of Ohio, just new to Cleveland. There are 55 NCAs in Ohio, most of them in central Ohio, as well as Dayton and Cincinnati. The only one you see in Cuyahoga County right there is the old Richmond Heights Mall redevelopment that is now called, is it Bell Oaks? Yes, it's now called Bell Oaks. Just a couple quick examples. So this is Bridge Park NCA in Dublin. So it's a suburb of Columbus. In this, the Bridge Park NCA assesses charges on retail, hotels, and property valuation to support infrastructure improvement. So it generates about $2.5 million a year, and it goes to pay down debt service from the upfront cost of shared parking district and other public amenities that benefit all of the different users and developers in that area. Another example is the Banks NCA in Cincinnati, which creates a 1% amenity fee on food and beverage purchases made in the Banks NCA district. That generates about $500,000 a year, and it's used mostly as operating expenses to support marketing, the creation of Adora, other programs that are going on. So now I'm going to talk about the process of creating a new community authority, which is what we're in the middle of right now. So the first, which has already happened, is a petition by the developer. It's going to be a little bit confusing as we talk about this. In this case, the developer is the city of Cleveland. And I'll talk about my organization's role in this in a second as well. There's a list of very specific things you can see here that are required to be a part of that petition. That petition really just kicks off the process, and that was approved by City Council in late September. And then you have a resolution also approved by council. We are now in the public hearing part of this process, which is required to occur between 30 and 45 days after the resolution itself is adopted, after which we'll go through the city's normal committee process, DPS committee, finance committee, and then a full vote of council. What we're doing here is really only voting to establish the tool. We're not actually kicking off any levy of charges. We are not forcing anyone to participate in this. We couldn't if we wanted to. What we're doing is just establishing the district that allows us to actually move forward with this in the future. Once that is established, the NCA will have a board that will be in the ordinance. We're still finalizing who those board members are going to be, but that will be in the actual legislation when it goes through committee. That board will then adopt bylaws, start to negotiate with property owners and lessees, and determine how those charges are actually spent as well. So by state law, an NCA board has to have at least 7 members, and it has to be an odd number of members. For this, we are proposing 9 board seats. One important piece of this here that I'm sure we'll talk about a lot in committee after this as well, is that a majority of board members are appointed by City Council. So 4 board members are appointed by City Council, and this is specific language in the ordinance, to represent the interests of present and future residents and employers of the NCA. 1 person is appointed by City Council as a representative of local government. That could be a council member, that could be a member of staff of the mayor's office or of council. And then 4 people are appointed by the developer, again in this case, the city, to represent the developer's interests. So the reason we're creating this NCA is that it allows property owners to buy into the redevelopment and improvement of the area around them. So when you talk to the users down on the lakefront specifically, we've gone through this long public planning process for what folks around the region want to see on the lakefront. And one of the biggest responses was, public space. We want free, public, open park space that we can enjoy down on the waterfront. That is something that will benefit a lot of the users down there. You have more activity, you have more people going down there. It's a nicer area, not just a large surface parking lot. And for that reason, users may choose, if they choose, to opt in to charges here. And the important thing to know, to point out here as well, is that we are establishing the authority to do something that council itself is not actually able to do. Council couldn't pass extra 2% bed tax for a hotel, for one specific hotel or for one specific neighborhood in the city. It would have to be citywide. This is creating the authority with a majority of board members appointed by council to do just that, to assess charges or fees in a specific geographic area only for the benefit of that specific geographic area. And again, can use those charges to support public infrastructure shared by property owners, lessees, and to establish programs and services within the district. And this is an important point to note as well. The revenue itself that is collected is secure enough to issue debt on. So when we talk about some of these upfront expenses that are needed in the long term, infrastructure improvements down on the lakefront, again, public park space is a big part of that. Those are things that cost money and are not financed in sort of a traditional real estate transaction. So this is just another tool to help put together the financing necessary to build out a lot of that public space down there also. This slide is just meant to show you that an NCA, we are also not just creating an entity that there is no oversight of. There is still a significant amount of oversight of this entity. So an NCA is subject to Ohio's open meeting and public records law. The NCA board is appointed by city council and the developer, which in this case is the city of Cleveland. All charges and fees must be disclosed to the public. So if there's a property assessment, that literally will go into the deed and you'll see it. It's public. If it's a retail charge or a food and beverage charge, there'll be a line item on your receipt that says this is an NCA charge. So it's not something that is being hidden in any way. And it may be dissolved by board action with concurring approval of city council at any point after its creation.
What specifically what may be dissolved?
The NCA entity itself.
The whole entity.
The whole. So if the board that is appointed by city council and city council decides in 5 years that this is just a waste of everyone's time or it's not being effective, they are able to dissolve the entity itself.
The board is able to.
The board with city council. And again, the board is appointed by city council. Sorry, go ahead.
I said okay.
Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about the geography now, and this is, to complicate this even further, we're actually going to have to go through this process twice, and that is because how the state statute and the NCA legislation defines property ownership for the initial NCA creation and for additional parcels are different. And because there are several different submerged land leases down on the lakefront, they have different lease terms in each of them, which is why we have to go through this process twice. So what we're doing right now in this public hearing is talking about what you see on the left-hand image there, which is the parking lot land north of the stadium. That is Voinovich Park. That is the airport, or so the parking lot next to the airport, Willard parking garage, and the Muni lots. And then once this process is done, assuming it gets passed, we will go back, again, go through this entire process, petition, 30 to 45-day waiting period, public hearing, committee meetings, to add the additional parcels, which is what you see in orange in the middle slide. That is the balance of Burke Airport, as well as the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the Great Lakes Science Center, and the Browns Stadium. So what you see on the right is the most important image of these. Once we're finished with this process, that will be the district of the NCA. So again, those are the only areas where an NCA can collect charges from, so long as those property owners and users opt in. And those are the only areas where NCA dollars can be spent moving forward. So The NCA is a little bit different than the organization that I run, which is the North Coast Waterfront Development Corporation. So the acronyms get confusing here, but there's an NCA and the NCWDC. The NCWDC, the organization that I'm director of, is an independent nonprofit with a mission to implement the lakefront vision. It was created by City Council last year and given 3 years worth of funding to sort of stand up, to stand itself up and to turn itself into a sustainable organization. The NCA is a public-private entity with board members appointed by City Council and by the developer, which again is the City of Cleveland. My organization will be the manager of the NCA, and what that means is literally someone has to work on negotiating the agreements between the property owners and the NCA entity with supervision and oversight by the board itself. There need to be bond issuances. Someone needs to actually literally figure out how to collect these fees, and then how to spend them afterwards as well. So that's what my organization is responsible for. Again, though, supervised and having oversight by a board that is appointed by both City Council and the City of Cleveland. So what we have here are NCA charges and uses. So I'm going to talk about charges first and then uses. And again, just to reiterate, all of these charges can only happen if property owners or lessees opt into these specific charges. What you see on your screen here are the max possible charges that the NCA can levy with the property owner's permission. These are likely not what the charges are going to be at the end of the day. After an NCA is created, the board will negotiate with each of the property owners to determine what a charge could be for any of these items. We're just setting a ceiling. So what that means is if in 10 years the NCA entity decided that it wanted to increase the charge on admissions or a ticket above $2, we would actually have to come back to council to do that. So what we're doing is just setting the max, and then the NCA entity of the board will negotiate with the users to determine what that is actually going to be. And there's a balance to strike there. And I've had conversations with all the users down there already about this. You want a charge that can help make a difference and help us to develop our lakefront into public space. However, you do not want to discourage use of the lakefront. You don't want to discourage folks from going to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, to the Science Center, to Browns games, to eating at Nuevo or Sushi 86, to doing anything down there. So there's a balance to strike within this, but what we're doing here is setting the max for all possible future charges in there. What I think is more important is also showing what the uses can be. So we've talked a little bit about this, but again, public infrastructure is a big piece of this. Public park space, landscaping, shared parking, public arts, programs, other shared services that all the property owners would share in both now and in the future, and then expenses for public space management or potential NCA management as well. So there could possibly be a world in which the NCWDC ends up managing some of the public space that is built down there. Charges from an NCA can go towards that management as well. But they're primarily used for upfront infrastructure costs. This is a timeline to sort of show you where we're at in this process. So, like I mentioned, the resolution was passed September 30th, kicking off the 30 to 45-day waiting period. We are now on November 12th in the public hearing for the NCA. Following this, again, we'll go through the standard City Council committee process, which will be DPS and Finance Committee, and then a full committee vote following that. And then again, just to reemphasize, assuming this passes at the end of that, we will come back to add those additional parcels to the NCA entity as well. So just next steps, again, creating the initial NCA, setting initial board members. Those names will be in the legislation, and then going through this entire process again. So that's the end of our presentation. Happy to answer questions or turn this into more of a conversation as well.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Did anybody sign up for public comment? Nobody? Okay. Well, thank you. So if we can leave the slide up, I think we'll want to reference back to that a few times. So I have a lot of questions, and I'm sure we'll delve into these more when my colleagues join us for actual committee hearings on this, but as a way to sort of get the ball rolling. Most of my questions fall into, I guess, two categories. One is this collection and spending of money and debt.
Sure.
And the other is in board and governance structure.
Sure.
So one of the big. And can we go to the page that shows the map? We'll start there. Okay. So in that footprint, there is a whole lot of parking.
Yes.
And it's parking that is controlled and owned primarily by the city of Cleveland. The Willard Garage behind us, Muni Lot.
Correct.
I think that the parcels north of Brown Stadium
City
is
owns
also
them.
city-owned.
It's all city-owned parking.
It's all city-owned. Oh,
Yeah.
okay, there we go. So my first question is, what are...
Almost all, excuse me. That's
Almost
right.
all.
Yeah.
What are the projected revenues if a parking addition of, I know you have said you don't plan on starting at $5, but what is your high-end projection
Sure.
to collect, and what is your low-end projection, and what range are you looking at collecting? And it seems like parking is the right place to start.
Yeah, parking will be the main driver there, right? Because it will be the city of Cleveland opting into it, as opposed to any private or nonprofit user. Currently, so assuming these are all assumptions, right? None of this is set in stone.
Right.
This is all just using some basic assumptions on how frequently people park there and what a charge could be over time. So assuming adding $1 a space.
$1, okay.
And assuming one car per day, and assuming, depending on the lot, anywhere from 20 days to 200 days per year, you're looking at around $900,000 produced annually.
Okay.
Obviously that can change. Those are pretty conservative assumptions, I think. I think most days you'll have more than one car going into a lot of those lots. We are, just to clarify, for the Willard lot specifically, that is solely focused on special events. So it's not something that we would charge City of Cleveland employees or, folks coming down here to get a birth certificate or to just do business with the city. It's special events solely. But long way of answering your question, around $900,000 is the current projection. That could be significantly lower if, when we start to do some analysis on the demand elasticity of parking on the lakefront.
Would that analysis include the existence of Browns games 8 or 9 times a year?
Yes.
That would, okay.
Yes.
And if they were to move, as the Haslam's stated that they intend to, what would the new projection look like if you lost those 9 games, 600,000 people?
Doing back of the napkin math in my head, somewhere around $600,000, $650,000.
We would drop down to about 250 to 300.
About 250 to 300. Those are, again, based on just projections.
Right.
Also assuming if nothing, that doesn't assume for the replacement.
Correct. You put your mic on,
Yeah, there's people.
Correct.
Sorry.
We have to take notes on all of this.
Yeah,
so-
that is, I know. That assumption also doesn't discuss the replacement of what would replace any stadium use and economic activity from that. So
So
Sure, but if
It
you're
was
making
probably higher
economic
than that.
projections, you're making best case and worst
Yes,
case scenarios.
sure.
Worst case would be nothing replaces it.
correct.
Right,
Yes.
and then that just goes away, and that would drop it down to 250,
Correct.
250,000.
Yeah.
Roughly. Right?
Yeah, roughly.
And the other sources of revenue, the 2% gratuity charge, there's only, I believe, 3, 4, well, there's 2 restaurants, right? And I think 3 or 4 retail
Correct.
storefronts. What do you think would be a high-low based on if they were to choose to opt
Sure.
in?
I haven't even done projections for those specifically because those users have not yet opted in to participating in this.
Okay, so that leads me to my next question. Have you had conversations with those operators about this,
Yes.
and what is their feedback?
So the operators that I've had conversations with, all the operators down there, 3 of them are on my board, the Great Lakes Science Center. They are all very willing to form this NCA and then work with us to understand again what the capacity of their users are or them as an organization is to issue charges. So we haven't had conversations with them on specific charges and what those could be, but all of them are supported in signing on to the creation of this NCA.
So moving away from them, because they're large institutions, to the more locally owned, smaller businesses down there, what incentive is there for them to opt in at all if they're going to reap the benefits, whether they pay in or not?
So, I mean, 1, they don't have to opt in, to your point. 2, the incentive is they also help with the effort of redeveloping our lakefront. Right now, ideally, you build a large public park space, you build apartments, you build a hotel. There are more people down there on a regular basis that can cross that bridge from the land north of the stadium over to Voinovich to use their services.
So they're opting in because of vision, not necessarily immediate return for their
Correct.
investment.
Correct. But at the end of the day, it's their decision.
Yeah. You mentioned the bridge. So if the bridge gets built from Mall
The land bridge.
C, the
Sure.
land bridge, that is owned by the city of Cleveland. How does a structure like that spans a public road interact with the land that is included? So if somebody sets up a hot dog cart on the bridge one day and sells hot dogs over the shoreway on the brand new fancy land bridge, does that person have the ability to opt into the North Coast?
Please, yeah.
Yeah.
So it would be a function probably of the hot dog cart's lease. So what will likely happen is if they are in the NCA area and they have to get a permit or something for that space, it would be a function of the leasing process if they want to opt in to the NCA charges. But the thing about an NCA is that you cannot, it's not like a special improvement district where you can just drop charges on top of somebody, whether they consent or not. So through that leasing process, and probably it would get passed on through their lease, they would be saying, yes, I want to sign up to sell hot dogs there, and part of that is that I realize that there's a little charge on each hot dog sale potentially. Now,
If they want to opt into it.
if they want to opt into it and participate in that lease with whoever is the direct owner of that land, likely the city. I admittedly do not know the leasing process for hot dog carts, so I was just using that as an example.
Okay.
But that's generally in NCAs how you see it work. Is the owner of the land for any tenants
Would make it part of the
It just
lease.
becomes part of their lease,
And
and that's their consent and opt-in.
And that would be the case with larger users, right? So if and when we start having conversations with hotel builders or multifamily builders, once right from the very start when we start talking about lease agreements, because all of that land would be leased from the city, it's city-owned land, you start to have the conversation around them opting into NCA participation at the very start of it.
I guess what I'm struggling to understand is, the Haslam's have said they're leaving. They're leaving Cleveland and they're moving the Browns. Why would they bother to pay into this at all for the remaining 3 years? And it seems that the only revenue that the city could capture really would be from Muni Lot to allow a charge on top of parking fees, which we raised last year or the year before those visitors stop visiting. And we would collect some money on the front end, but then we would lose it on the tail end. And why would the Haslam's include any of their concession sales inside the stadium into this, knowing that they want to leave? Like, there's no incentive for them to do that. Why do they really care? They're not part of the vision anymore, unless they're bluffing and they do plan on sticking around, in which case they have a lot of incentive to pitch in on this and then be part of redevelopment. I'm trying to understand, like, what incentive is there for people that are there, if the money is mostly going to come from parking, from special events, to levy more fees on their visitors?
Yeah, so I mean, one, I can't speak to the Haslam's decision. That's their decision. At the end of the day, just like everyone else, they would have to opt in to charges. I mean, is there a world in which the Haslam's have said publicly many times how important lakefront development is, regardless of them being there? Is there a world in which they opt in? Absolutely, but it's going to be up to them at the end of the day. In terms of incentives, it really is the vision, the future development of the lakefront and what we see, and it's going to be up to each of those individual users to decide if that is incentive enough to opt into this. What we're doing with this legislation is just creating the ability to do so.
And all we could,
Please.
I'm going to layer one additional thing on there. There is some self-interest in all NCA formation. Where the money gets spent that gets collected in the new community district has to directly benefit the district. So if you don't opt in to participate in the NCA, you are potentially foregoing some of that direct benefit of the NCA program on areas of the land down there. Now,
great point. So what would be an
obviously,
example of directly benefiting? Like, what would be an example of that?
public infrastructure upgrades. I don't know. I don't understand the
Shared-
public infrastructure of
shared
any of
parking.
those sites. Shared parking. There are a number of things that, if you are fully participating in the NCA, you can take advantage of, and if you are not, you might be near an NCA and take some spillover benefit from that, but directly having direct investment from the NCA on
So-
your actual property is not.
So let's get weird and let's just play with scenarios. Let's say we put a new parking lot north of the stadium.
Sure.
We turn it into it already is for the most part. Say the Browns don't opt in. Can we tell the Browns that they can't let their stadium visitors use that parking lot because they're not opted into the NCA?
I can't answer that. That would be a City of Cleveland parking
Yeah.
decision. That's not an NCA question. That's a.
So the NCA can't take away public benefit from city-owned land from a business owner. I'm trying to
No,
get at the
yeah,
point where you said
sorry,
they
it's
opt in and they get they get benefits from opting
Additional
in.
benefits.
Like, they get it whether they opt in or not.
Not necessarily. Not
What would
all
be an
of it.
example of something they don't get if they don't opt in?
If you wanted to redo some the infrastructure using NCA funds that would directly benefit, the existing stadium site or the Rock Hall or something like that, there's a pot of money that might not directly go onto those parcels that if they do opt into the NCA, they would be able to tap into as part of this vision.
But to answer your question, would there be spillover effect? Yes, of course
Yes.
there would be.
Yeah, so I'm still trying to figure out what the direct benefit would be. So if NCA wanted to buy new trash cans for the entire North Coast area,
Sure.
and they were going to be branded place making cool new trash cans, and the Science Center said we don't want to pay into the NCA, we could skip the NCA for the new trash cans. Is that like a public benefit they would not get?
If they're participating in the NCA, they would be able to benefit from those trash cans. If their parcel was excluded from the NCA,
Right.
created entirely, then we would not be able to put trash cans on their land.
You need their agreement to be part of it in order to access their property too.
Correct. Toward access to property for their property to directly benefit from the NCA expenses.
Okay. Has anybody told you no? They don't want to have a conversation about this. They're not interested.
No.
Move it along.
No.
No. Okay. So, if the NCA issues public debt and for a project and is unable to make payment, who is responsible for the NCA's debt payment if the NCA cannot make payment? Thinking about bonds.
It would end up
Being the bond issuer.
be the bond issuer. It's part of the risk. So if there's not, so it depends on how you would structure that debt. But if your question is, would the city be responsible for that?
Sure,
The
yeah,
answer
that'd
is the answer is no, unless the city for some reason is deciding to participate to strengthen the credit or
Most bond markets require somebody to back the debt.
so
requirement of the market
it
itself.
just depends on the type of bond issuance. So you can do a debt issuance where the backstop of the debt is the NCA revenues, and it's just a question of for the credit market how expensive that debt is versus if you were to guarantee it with a public entity's a general obligation, you would make the debt cheaper. So it's just a business decision as to how you structure that. But
So-
it is not required that the city back the NCA's debt.
So if the NCA went into a bond market and said, we would like to purchase whatever, we'd like to take out this much debt, the city of Cleveland is backing us. That would be cheaper than if you walked in and said, we would like to get this much debt and we have no backup
Only
plan.
the NCA revenue is the back.
And our revenue is the
Correct.
only revenue.
The bond market would factor that in
Yeah.
to its business decision to one, say yes to a bond issuance, and
Okay.
two, determine what an interest rate would be there.
Could your board decide whether or not to have the city back? I guess.
No.
No.
Okay.
Part of the purpose of this and this tool specifically is it's taking the risk off of the city of Cleveland, right? Like the city of Cleveland is not backstopping.
Yeah.
We're not backstop any of this debt. It's not. It doesn't impact the city's own
Yeah.
bonding capacity.
So and for the 5 people following along at home,
There might be 6 now.
there might be 6. And for the media in the room, the reason I'm trying to ask these questions is that we're dealing with a problem over at the Gateway District, right? Where something that was done 30 years ago has now come back to Cleveland. They won $20 million. And the nuclear option, if we don't do it, is that we suddenly own a baseball stadium that the city doesn't really want to own. That's what they would do. They would offload the property to us.
And similarly, I can't speak to anything about the Gateway District, but just like with any of those transactions, the city made a decision through the ownership and lease structure to be the backstop. of
Correct,
that.
and so-
it was a contractual. Similar here, like the city could choose to for whatever reason, if it makes sense on a deal for public infrastructure that the
Yeah.
NCA is going to install.
So,
Could choose to do that, but it does not have to. And one of the beauties of the NCA is that debt does not impact the city's general obligation at all. It is a completely separate public entity with its own books.
And what we're all trying to do is look for creative ways to raise revenue because Cleveland is trying to protect the general fund. We've been through many battles trying to defend the general fund from being raided by all manner of people that are trying to. And so this is an alternative to spending general fund revenue, and that's why this is an attractive thing. And I think that's why we introduced this, and I think that's why most of my colleagues are very intrigued by this. But say we were to build a Ferris wheel, right? Okay, we've all heard about the Ferris wheel. If the Ferris wheel, we don't want to be the owner of a Ferris wheel in 30 years because the NCA thought it was a good idea and then paid for it and then couldn't maintain maintenance on it 30 years from now, and all of a sudden they revert it back to Cleveland. You're saying that those types of decisions have to be agreed upon by the city at a later date. If the NCA comes to the city and says, you know what, we're going to use some of our revenue to build a Ferris wheel, we think you guys should back us at the bond market, that would be a decision for the city to make at a later date, not one that we're making today or with this legislation.
Correct.
That's absolutely correct.
We are today we are creating the ability to make that decision in the future. We are not making the decision itself.
Okay.
Just like when we talk about charges, right? We're creating the ability to do it. We are not catalyzing anything happening.
Okay. Would the NCA be able to help finance and build a land bridge?
Conceptually, if the land bridge is in the NCA district and it benefits the users of the NCA, yes, it could.
Would the NCA be able to apply for funding sources outside of the revenue collected through what we're talking about?
Depends on the funding source. I mean, I can speak to the land bridge funding specifically. You know, as of right now, the city is going after large federal government grants to cover the cost of the land bridge. Could the NCA contribute to that capital stack? Sure, it could.
Could the NCA apply for the same grants?
Most of those grants, you have to be a public entity to apply for them.
But you are a quasi-public
Potentially,
entity.
it just depends on the grant.
Yeah, depends. So again, depends on what the specific grant is, what federal entity it is. If it's state versus federal government, it really just depends. I'm sorry that I don't have a clear answer for you, but it just. I mean, there's hundreds and thousands of different funding sources that exist for this.
To your point, it is a separate public entity. That's more of a on the grant side. What are the qualifications for who can and cannot get certain grants? Most of which are designed for more traditional public entities. But similar to a port authority, there are probably buckets of money that an NCA could tap into.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Trying to keep this to the fees.
No, I appreciate it.
We've lost our video feed, but that's okay. I guess the audio is working, and
no one needs to see us anyway.
well, yeah, no, we're not pretty. But Madam Clerk, there was an issue about making sure that we have transcripts of this meeting. So the audio is working, and we're okay to continue. We haven't. Okay, as long as we haven't lost our audio recording for public record, then I guess we're okay. Okay. So my next question is going to be, could fees be compulsory? And I understand that everybody would have to enter into an agreement, the business owners or the property owner if it's not the city, or the city as the property owner. But you also said something about 10 mills that could be levied on property owners. And I would like you to explain a little bit more about how you could assess 10 mills from property owners in the...
Sure. So I'm going to let Brandon talk about the sort of the specifics and other examples of what that's looked like for other NCAs. I think specifically, I just want to highlight it up front that let's say a multifamily builder wanted to come down and build 400 apartments on the lakefront.
Sure.
As part of the initial lease agreement they would enter into with the city, as part of any sort of community benefits agreement, as part of any approval process to be able to do that, they could opt into a millage charge or a millage increase that goes to an NCA pot specifically. But Brendan, if you want to talk about sort of how that's worked in other NCAs.
No, that's a great starting example. So on the multifamily side, it would be part of any development agreement, any approvals, like Scott said, and then those millages would just be paid through the regular property tax portion. And if that property were to transfer, the NCA charges are a covenant that runs with the land. So any buyer, any future buyer of the multifamily building would know that they are signing up for whatever the property tax assessment is plus the NCA charge. So they go in knowing. To the extent that there were ever, for some, the vision called for any single-family purchases or townhome or whatever, where you're not getting renters, you're actually getting a person purchasing a property, same thing. There's a requirement that in their purchase documents that there's a disclosure of the additional NCA charge. Just as there is a disclosure if you were to go and say there were a retail charge, it would be disclosed like a sales tax.
Is this 10 mils something the NCA can make a condition of the development, or is it something the developer can proceed with or without? Can you tell a developer you must pay this 10 mil if you want to build here?
Conceptually, yes, you could. Do it.
And is that, but the NCA doesn't own the land. Now, I know that you're talking about taking over some submerged water leases over by Burke, but the owner of the land is Cleveland.
Correct.
So wouldn't the city be selling the land?
The city would be leasing the land, not
Leasing the
necessarily
land to
selling
a
the land.
developer.
Correct.
And the condition of the lease is that this developer will pay an additional 10 mil.
Participating in the NCA could be a condition of your leases, yeah. And that charge regime getting set up with them.
Are there examples of developers who build on leased land?
Yeah, right now, Nuevo, the entire current building on the lakefront is all on long-term leases.
Yeah.
I mean, my background is in multifamily development, right? So, I mean, a financeable lease for a large-scale development, hotel, anything like that, is generally, could be as low as 60 years, generally 75 and above years of a lease is a term that you can get financing for. Mm-hmm. So, but do developers build on leased land all the time?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess the 10 mil would also then be eligible to the city of Cleveland. I mean, that stadium has a property value, and if the city chose to, the city could opt into an additional 10 mil on our own property.
You could, but you would just be paying it to yourself, and that.
We'd be paying to the
NCA.
NCA,
Yeah.
but it would be coming out of the taxpayer funds. So this is where, so we pay property taxes on our own property because property taxes are collected by the county, not the city. So we pay to the county, right?
Right.
And
It's
the
'cause of the
county
use.
kicks
Yeah.
back whatever our cut of the property tax
Correct.
is. But that would be an increased tax on Cleveland residents if we were to do a new millage on existing property that the city owns. I don't know why we would.
Yeah,
it would be a horrible thing to do.
Yeah,
I don't think we should think.
I said to take a step back. I think what we're getting into is like there's a lot of could this happen? Could this happen?
Sure.
Yes, but there are significant there's a significant oversight structure that's placed on top of this NCA.
Right.
So if city council saw that this was happening, that the NCA board, because this is all public record, was considering doing this.
Right.
The city appoints more than half of the board members of the NCA.
It's just I think it's important for us to distinguish what's probable from what's possible.
Sure.
It's possible that we could add an additional 10 mil assessment on property we currently own.
Sure.
You would,
Or the
again,
NCA.
though,
It would make sense.
city council would have to consent to that additional millage.
And it wouldn't make sense, but it is possible under this. And that's what I'm trying to flesh out the difference between what's possible, what's probable, and what the goal is.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. However, that 10 mil can't be compulsory. We can't force it on existing property owners. We can't go down to Nuevo and say, congratulations, you just got 10 more mil.
Correct.
Okay.
The process for them to opt into charges, they literally have to come and petition the NCA entity. Like they have to be the one to ask to participate in this and to be charged.
Okay. I don't want to stop my colleague here from asking any questions. If you came in with anything on your mind, I do have more questions. I was getting into board and governance, but
I was at the first meeting.
Yeah,
Jessica, I'm aware of it. I just have another meeting. I just come to give you support.
pull up a mic. We're having a round table. I don't even think we're using Robert's rules. I think this is just an open meeting. So, let's go to the slide about the board structure. There it is. Okay. 4 people appointed by City Council to represent interests of present and future residents and employers of the NCA. So are there any residents of the current NCA? Does anybody live down there?
There's like 13 apartments or something like that. So,
Really?
there are some people that live down there. The build above, not above Nuevo, the building just south of it, those are apartments.
Oh, cool. All right. And then what's the total number of employers in the NCA's current footprint?
There is Burke Airport, the Great Lakes Science Center,
Yep.
the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the Cleveland Browns. There's other employers who would benefit from it, the Port of Cleveland. And it's also future employers as well, right? If we want to see future multifamily development, future hotel development, future public park space that's managed by another entity.
So there's the big four. There's 2 restaurants,
2 restaurants.
and then 2 or 3 retail
Correct. Yeah.
business owners.
Yeah.
So we're up to 9, right? So we would have to choose 4 from those 9.
Correct.
Okay. And once those people are appointed by city council, they don't really represent our interests as a city council. They represent their interests as people that are living or running businesses in the NCA.
Correct. However, I'll let Brendan talk about what the process would be to take them off of the board if they were not representing the interests of the city in the way city council saw fit.
Yeah, council can remove them for cause if they are not living up to the expectations of what you would like to see out of a representative. I would also add, though, it is actually that they are there to represent both. They're there to be this is the public side. In a traditional NCA, the developer is a private entity, so this would be the public side. So they're there to represent the public's interests, including city council, including the residents and employers of the NCA district, obviously who are the most directly affected folks by the NCA. Then, of course, there is a direct local government representative that is also appointed by city council.
Yeah.
We missed one. Good time, Charlie. I wouldn't want to miss
Oh, yeah. That's okay, right. Is the submarine in there? Oh, that's the science center.
that. The Science Center, yeah.
So would the board be reviewing agreements on charges and voting whether or not to approve them, or what would the board's role in the fee collection agreements be?
Brendan, can you talk about that? Just
Sure.
examples.
Yeah, so the board's role is they are the governing body of the NCA. They, similar to city council, they have to approve things that the NCA would have to approve. So if there were contracts, the board would have to approve those contracts. For example, usually what you see is there is some sort of development agreement with, a master developer or other developers. The NCA board has to review and approve that. There are other things the NCA board has to review and approve, including their own bylaws, public records. It is a governing body similar to a legislative authority of the city of a public entity.
So if you were to strike a deal with one of the business owners down there and the board thought it was a really bad deal, would they be able to strike it down?
Yes.
Or, not approve it?
Yes.
They would
Yes.
have that type of authority?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was sent some information about the state of Ohio's laws governing this that seems to indicate that new community authorities must be established by December 31st of this year.
No, that's a very specific type of developer-led new community authority that does not apply here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a subsection of, it's 349, maybe 03.
0.01.
01. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a buried in one of the definitions, there's a type of property ownership that would have required a new community authority to be set up by this year, but that is not the type of property ownership or control that we are dealing with this NCA. That does not apply here.
Okay. Is there any sunset on NCA development, the creation of NCAs in Ohio?
No.
Because I remember what came up a year or two ago, and we only had, the clock was ticking on
The
creating-
TIF?
The TIF district, that's right,
yeah,
that's right.
yeah.
The clock was ticking if we didn't take
Yeah,
it. That's not.
That's not the
Okay.
case here.
I mean, the NCA, like the ordinance was established when? I mean,
When the petition was filed,
no, when the NCA, the concept of an NCA ordinance was established with the state.
the chapter in the revised code, I think, dates back to, I think, the 60s or the 70s. And then the first time it got used was the 90s, and it's been amended over the time. That subsection is probably designed for a very specific type of development that wanted to take advantage of an NCA
Okay.
that otherwise wouldn't have qualified.
It was a question that came in,
Yeah.
so we're going to figure it out. So I guess my reaction to the board structure is that really city council has no authority. We're picking 4 people that are down there already that have interest in development of the area, and that's good, right? There's nothing wrong with that. We're picking one person to represent the local government, and then you're picking 4 people. So really, city council doesn't really have any control over this once it's created. We're sort of the body that appoints a handful, 4 of 9 business owners down there, or some of the residents that live there, and then we put one more person on it. So the only real leverage that the city has moving forward, should this be passed, is in negotiating fees and financial agreements with the NCA as a property owner. Because we are the property owner of almost all of it.
Yeah, as the property owner, any future development, right, that would participate in NCA would still go through standard city approval processes.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, yes, the description of who city council can appoint is part of the Ohio Revised Code. So that's not something that, we
This
just
board
toss in there.
structure is required by state law?
At least seven members and the council appointees represent the interests of current and future residents and employers.
Future residents. Interesting.
Well, that's to give you flexibility on, right now there's not a hotel down there, but
Yeah.
there could be in the future, right? That's the purpose of sort of that language in there.
To kind of layer on that a little bit, usually NCAs are layered on top of an area where there is no existing development. That is historically how they've been used. So it is future residents, employers, because there's literally nothing there yet. This is different. This is a very unique and exciting use of the tool.
Okay. My last just couple of questions, and I'll hand it over here. Burke. So a bunch of this land, and if we want to go back to the map of the land, is the existing footprint of Burke's parking lot and terminal. I think in blue,
it's
the far left is that blue their terminal? Or is the
That's
terminal still to the east of that, northeast of that?
I think that's just the parking lot. It is whatever
just the
is
parking lot.
in
It's just the parking lot.
the
yeah.
master submerged land lease that the city controls for that area.
Okay.
Correct.
But
That's the lot when you're driving down 9th and the rock hall's on your left. There's
Yeah.
that lot on the right. That's what that is.
oh, that's on the right?
If you're driving down,
Well,
if you're driving.
Oh,
north
okay,
down-
okay, yeah. Gotcha. Okay. So it's, no surprise, or it's not new information. There's interest in shutting down Burke. And if the NCA becomes and by the way, why or how would you take over the submerged land leases, and who would you take them over from?
How would the NCA entity?
Yeah.
The
NCWDC.
Yeah, I mean, so theoretically, could the NCWDC, for the purpose of development, be a sublessee of the land leases that the city holds? Yes, but that's also a city decision.
So when you said this, that you could take over the submerged land lease, you mean you could become a subleasee?
Correct. Yeah, the city would continue to own the submerged land leases,
Okay.
and these are all, again, conceptually in the future. Could this happen? Yes.
Okay. Does that have any interaction with the the process of shutting down Burke with the Federal Aviation Administration, or the requirements? Would they have anything to say about property ownership? Could the city enter into a sublease agreement with another authority while it's still an active airport, or would that have to be resolved first? Because you're talking about federal regulations.
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, Brendan, if you.
For the purpose of including it in the NCA, the question is the city ownership structure. So not for these steps, to the extent in the future how charges interact with an airport is an open question. Just like any user, it's a question of their current existing leases, it's a question of the uses, it's a
Right.
question of any, there are a number of other boxes we would have to check that we do not know today. But
Right.
for its inclusion, it's a question of city ownership and control, which
It has.
it has.
It has what?
The city has the necessary ownership or control over Burke
Okay.
to include it in the second phase of the NCA.
Okay. But it operates as an enterprise fund currently, so we wouldn't be able to levy fees on an enterprise fund, could we? We couldn't add it to like landing fees or something. We couldn't tack onto landing fees as a way to raise money for the NCA because it's an enterprise fund and we can't do that.
There's nothing about an enterprise fund that would stop the NCA from being able to levy additional charges on top of it.
They would have to agree to it.
You'd have to agree to it.
The airlines that pay the
All of,
landing fees.
again,
I see.
it's a structure of the contracts that govern
Yeah.
how money is spent, how economic activity takes place at an airport. That we don't have an answer for today, but the structure of an NCA can be placed on top of existing city uses.
Okay.
Did that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Last question about Burke. The footprint that we see on this screen, is that all the eligible land lease land? It's there. For people that don't know, part of Burke doesn't exist. On paper, it's not even
Considered land.
created because it's new and it didn't exist 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Is that everything that's eligible? Is that everything that exists on paper, or is there land still to the, closer to the lake and east that would be potentially footprint for the NCA, or is what you're showing there all that can legally be set in stone?
As of today, that is what exists on the registered parcel. That is an
Okay.
outline of an existing
Yeah.
parcel that the city has the necessary ownership and control over.
Okay.
To your point, some of the other land that is fill, TBD.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, obviously we put a runway on it, but that doesn't mean that there's paper trail of its existence.
Correct.
Right? Okay. Councilman Kelly, do you have any questions you'd like to ask?
Thanks for being here. Through the chair. Some of the residents were, when I was talking to them, they had some interest in this. First of all, this is kind of a gamble. I think it's worth a gamble. A lot of my residents at the moment feel that Brother Bibb is building for the city for people who are not here yet. Possibly, like you said, for things in the future that are coming, which is fine.
Sure.
There's many things going on in the city that I didn't experience, my kids didn't, hopefully my grandchildren will. But when we had this last discussion with Jessica, first of all, you have 9 people. Usually it's 7, so I know you have a couple extra. I agree with Brother Harsh that we're not going to have too much. We have one city council person appointed, but the other 4 are really going to be on their own entities, developers. I think they'll fall on the other side of the coin. That's not a bad thing if we get something done over here. The situation with the Brown Stadium wasn't resolved the last time we met. So is there a difference now that if the Browns do leave, is there anything can be done to help support the finances of possibly taking the stadium down or rehabbing it or something with this?
Yeah, so I mean, I wanted to just comment on one thing you said. I wouldn't necessarily describe this as a gamble because there's really nothing that's being risked here. There's nothing. We're creating the authority to do something that the city currently doesn't have the authority to do. So there's limited, in my opinion, right? There's limited downside and quite significant upside. The stadium decision or all of the statements made by the Haslam Sports Group does not impact the creation of this NCA. Does it impact their potential participation in it after 2029? Absolutely. But could NCA funds be used to demolish a stadium? I actually don't know the answer to that. Brandon, I'm not sure if you do.
Conceptually, yes. Land acquisition, demolition, public infrastructure are all qualifying uses of NCA funds. The answer to that specific question is more of a decision for the city and the NCA down the road.
Okay, well, through the chair, you're right. It's a limited gamble because the employers are paying for everything, taxes on the parking and extra maybe for seating or food or liquor. But these are just some of the things, people are asking, this is something new and the stadium wasn't, and I don't know if it's resolved as of yet really, but thank you for that answer. Do you have any idea if this would pass and to go through? Is there one particular first thing that you'd be looking to do, no matter what it is? I've been asked that.
Sure. If this were to pass, I think the first thing we would look to do is enter into an agreement with the city of Cleveland for charges on city-owned parking lots. We would also right away start to have conversations with the existing users down there around what potential NCA participation on their behalf can look like. Because this is just, I know I've said it a bunch of times, so I'm sorry for repeating myself. This is just creating the ability to levy charges and to use that money to benefit the lakefront and the future lakefront. But the first thing that would happen is the board of the NCA that is appointed would start to negotiate agreements or realistically start to have conversations at first with the users down there, which includes the City of Cleveland Parking Division, on what potential charges would be, if any.
Okay, thank you through the chair. So then, so if you would need, you're going to build something, you would need infrastructure underground or something. This is what these, so the public, this is what these charges would be levied for. Can you just give a little
Correct.
explanation
Yeah.
of that?
I mean, so the charges can be used for a number of things. The most important part of the larger plan for our lakefront, in my opinion, is the large amount of public space. Right. I think stadium or no stadium, a large amount of the land down on our lakefront will be free, open, public space. Last time we met, we talked about Edgewater, right?
Right.
And it will look different than that, obviously, but will be free, open, public space. Parks don't finance themselves, and they're not typically built through traditional real estate transactions. So I think the biggest example of what these charges can be used towards is, part of the capital stack of building a large public park that is free and open to the public. It could also be used for infrastructure improvements, for storm, sanitary, electrical lines that we need to extend beyond north of where the stadium is. It could be used for building shared district parking in the future. It could be used for any other public infrastructure improvements, think sidewalks and other public amenities that are down there. It can also be used for programs or long-term operations and maintenance as well. So you think about if, and these are all years away, right? If a public park is built, that has to be maintained and managed over time, and that also comes at a cost. These are charges that could that could go towards that also.
Okay, thank you. Through the chair, and then some of these, last conversation we had, there was going to be a few different public spaces, which I appreciated. And then there's a possibility right now, the city, sometimes we have difficulties maintaining the public spaces we have. Is there still an opportunity for like Metro Parks or to do something, or would that be up to the entities there to support it, to maintain it?
It's city-owned land, so at the end of the day, who supports and maintains it would be up to the city of Cleveland.
Okay.
There's a lot of different possibilities for what that could look like. There's a lot of users who maintain parks in the city of Cleveland that do quite a good job. You mentioned Metro Parks. Voinovich Park, that is maintained by Downtown Cleveland Inc., I think is kept up very well on the northern part of the land there. It could be the organization that I am the executive director of. There's a lot of different options, but that will be up to the city at the end of the day because it's city-owned land on who maintains it. But I agree with you that maintenance of parks is just as important as building the park to begin with.
All right, thank you through the chair. The one big question that everybody's asked, because this is going on, is Burke Lakefront not going to be here?
Sure. So that is also a city of Cleveland decision. My organization doesn't own Burke. The city does. I've read all of the statements that you've read on it, and have seen everything that has been released, just like you have. But I don't have any additional insider knowledge to what the process is there.
All right, well, thank you through the chair. This is exciting. I mean,
thank you.
We had a nice conversation with Jessica and you before, and a lot more questions. But thank you. We're moving the city. I appreciate that.
No, I appreciate you saying that, Councilman. I also enjoyed our conversation talking about my kids and your grandkids and what we're trying to build for folks to enjoy in the future.
Thank you, Councilman. It's not lost on anybody here that we've been talking about the lakefront for a century. Cleveland plans for developing the lakefront are as famous as, the Browns jersey detailing all of our starting quarterbacks, right? It's just a thing of lore that we don't really, look at with pride, but it is our fact of life. And I feel like right now, one of the reasons this is so murky is that we're kind of dealing with like Schrodinger's lakefront. Like, is there an NFL team? Maybe. Is there an airport there? Maybe.
Sure.
We don't know what's on the lakefront right now. We've got 100 years worth of effort to try to do something. This is clearly a new tool in the toolbox to try to get there. We don't know if we're dealing with it the way it exists now, or if it's going to look entirely different 10 years from now with no NFL and no airport. Maybe. We just don't know. We're in a state of transition, in a state of change, and it's hard for us to really anticipate those types of decisions. And they're going to be, we're engaged in a multi-administrative effort, right? The work for the developing the lakefront will span many administrations, and we're hopefully laying the groundwork now to allow this type of development that will fully realize our lakefront, like so many of our predecessors have dreamed of. And So my apologies to the public if some of the questions seem a little vague, but there's just a lot to try to sort out and make understood. I did have two other questions I thought of. Can any of this money be used for police?
No.
No. This will not be able to be used for private security, or private security, I said more so than police.
Not for police, fire. You can't provide traditional city public safety services with NCA funds. As part of the operation and maintenance and programming, could the NCA hire private security? Potentially.
Potentially.
Yeah.
So like the Downtown Cleveland Alliance has the people walking around with the buckets
Right.
and the brooms, they're employees of the Downtown Cleveland Alliance. The NCA could have staff working in the area that could be cleaning and maintenance, or it could be somebody walking around saying, hey, you doing all right over there? Is everything okay? Just checking up on you, and it's some kind of like security detail if they wanted, if that was.
Yes.
Yeah, potentially.
Okay.
But you cannot supplant existing police coverage. And as part of the petition, we have to certify that there is sufficient police coverage.
Okay.
Yeah.
And say this were to be passed by December 31st of this year and go into effect on January 1st, how quickly would you be able to levy fees and assessments? Is it like a week, a month, a year? Is there any? Is it just how quickly you can get a deal negotiated?
That's exactly it. It's how quickly you can get. I mean, the steps are the board is created. It sets up bylaws. It sets up all of the internal organizational processes that any organization has, and then enters into negotiations with the users there. So the speed at which anything would be levied would be dependent on how quickly those development agreements are finalized.
Okay. We did have one member of the public come sign up for public comments, so I do want to give Reverend Pinkney an opportunity to come up since she did sign up. Since this isn't a typical committee, we don't have to follow typical committee rules, but I am going to stick to the 3 minutes. But you didn't have to be here to sign up earlier, so we're all good on that. So let me pull up my little clock. Your microphone is on. Reverend, welcome, and I'll start when you're ready.
Good morning, everyone. I'm always for upkeep and building and new ideas. My challenge through the chair to everyone at this table is Cleveland is residentially is a predominantly black, brown, and multiracial ethnic community. I would like to know, since you have another white contractor with an idea coming to Cleveland, where is this contractor going to be inclusive of the black, brown, and multiracial community, and also employing, because I never see the city of Cleveland hiring or having bids for non-white contractors. It's obvious I have white family members by the color of my skin. Matter of fact, I'm predominantly Irish. So I would like to know, and I would like to know also, since I am a pastor, how is this going to affect the church community, and what is going to take place on the water, since we're talking about things taking place on the waterfront. And council members, I'm still sticking to the fact that we need to change the name of our football team. We were talking about the football team to Overcomers, and I would like to know how are the people, black, brown, and multiracial community going to be impacted positively by this agreement?
Sure.
And where are we going to be included?
Sure.
Reverend, thank you very much for asking that. It's definitely worth noting that we are four white men sitting here talking about the future of the lakefront. And were this 1924, that would probably be par for the course. But this is 2024. And would you like to address that question about diversity and inclusion?
Yeah. So, Reverend, thank you very much for coming and for asking that question. I really appreciate it. So, first of all, just to clarify, I am not a contractor. I run a nonprofit organization that was created by City Council to figure out how to execute on the lakefront development that we want to see, and specifically how to execute on the master plan for the lakefront that's been being put together over the last couple of years, that has included a lot of public comment, a lot of public input, meetings in every ward in the city, and a real effort. And this is not something I'm taking credit for. This is the city planning department and Director Huang, a real effort to ensure that voices of every community, every neighborhood were included here. In terms of how Black and brown Clevelanders would be represented.
And multiracial.
And multiracial would be represented in both the construction of what we want to see and what we are actually going to see at the end of the day. In terms of construction, the city council, I think, did a really great thing late last year in passing, or I guess earlier this year, in passing the community benefits ordinance. So any construction, because this is in the city of Cleveland, would be required to participate in a community benefits agreement that has targets for MBE, FBE, and Section 3 hiring, with penalties associated for not hitting those targets. There are also a number of other ways for future developers and contractors, of which I am not, again, to make sure that their projects are benefiting the community. And I think specifically here, one of the reasons that I've been really excited about the opportunity on the lakefront is that there's so much to it, and it actually creates an opportunity for us to think about community benefits in a way that is holistic across a lot of different projects and construction projects that we build, as opposed to sort of individual and piecemeal. So that's one. In terms of what will be there at the end of the day, and how will Black, brown, and multiracial folks in Cleveland benefit from it? Like I mentioned, the plan that exists now and any future planning that would happen has been done thoughtfully, has received feedback from every neighborhood, every ward in the city, and really focuses predominantly on free public space. Right, so like Councilman talked about, the fact that we've been trying to do this for a century, right? And the way that I think about it is there are two real reasons why we haven't been able to do this, and why our downtown lakefront specifically. And I want to say downtown lakefront because there's lots of other great parts of the lakefront that you can access, Edgewater being one of them, for free. One, it's difficult to get down there, right? You have a highway that is separating downtown from the actual lakefront, and I've told this story in most of our meetings. When I park downtown and walk my kids over there, you're crossing a highway. It doesn't feel good. It feels dangerous.
Absolutely.
We are working to address that. We've recently received a large federal grant to start to make the shoreway safer as it goes through. So that's one, is access. Two, and I think most importantly, in getting to your question specifically, right now, almost everything that you can do on the downtown lakefront is pretty expensive, right? Whether it's tickets to the museums or the Rock Hall, which are phenomenal institutions. I go to both of them quite a bit. They're great, but they do cost money to go there, right?
Right.
The Browns tickets are not exactly cheap. Nuevo and Sushi 86 are both great restaurants, but it costs money to use them. What we're trying to create here with the NCA is to raise revenue by, yes, charging users a very small amount up front to create a pot of money that we can pull from to build and construct free public space that is open to everyone and is available for everyone to access, and to give them a reason to go down to our waterfront to experience that. So that's really what we're trying to do here at a high level. Is any one part of the lakefront or all of the lakefront going to solve all of Cleveland's challenges?
Yes.
No, of course not, right?
Absolutely.
But we are being thoughtful in how we're moving forward with this.
And thank you, Mr. Councilman. I wanted to thank you for hearing the voice of a female also.
Absolutely.
Because
and
I'm
Reverend,
sitting at
I
the
thought it was
table
such a
with
good question. I stopped your clock because I thought it was such a good question. So I'm going to resume your clock. You've got a minute and a half.
Yes, sir. Thank you for hearing the voice of a female and a mother. It is a contract because it's an agreement between yourself and an organization, and that's where I came with the contract piece. Not that you're a construction company, but it is a contract. And Councilman Chairman Harsh, would you take in consideration the question that I did ask and be inclusive in your decision through what the challenges are that he also said that they are planning to address? RTA needs to be at this discussion. The church as a whole needs to be at this discussion. Some of the women's organizations, the utility unit. I would like to see the components that make up the city of Cleveland at this discussion. So it's not a challenge or combative situation, but answers can come forward. That way we don't need the police. If we need the police, that's the problem. If we have them, then that's a convenience. But I would like to have some more people in the things that dominate or are components of the city of Cleveland to have a discussion with this gentleman and his vision. And I would like to see this go forward with the hope that Black, brown, multiracial people including women, are at the table with these discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reverend. That was 3 minutes exactly. Fantastically done. And I would say, on behalf of City Council, absolutely, Cleveland is a majority-minority city, has been for as long as any of us have been alive, and will continue to be for as long as any of us are alive. And anything we do to the lakefront that is not inclusive of all residents of the city of Cleveland will not be acceptable to this body. I know it will not be acceptable to the mayor. And part of what we're trying to accomplish here is opening up access to give everybody in Cleveland access to their downtown lakefront. And I think that's one of the actual noble goals that they're doing here, is to have free activities and not turn it all into privatized pay-to-play activities. So well heard, Reverend. Thank you for your participation today and for coming down.
Says we don't defile the law because people are poor. Poor people are responsible too.
Sure.
But we do make a balance for rich, poor, and middle class.
That's right.
Have a great day.
It's a big round world, and there's room for all of us.
Thank you, Reverend.
Do Councilman Kelly, anything else you want to throw in there? We all good?
No, we're all good. Anything to do with construction, there's CBAs, there's PLAs. We do a great job here in the city. We've gotten phenomenal at it, and we will continue.
And Chairman Hairston, when this gets to DPS, will be dealing with all of those types of questions, and I'm sure he's got a whole book of questions, but I think today was a sneak peek into this conversation. Any closing remarks?
No, very much appreciate your time. Appreciate the time that you both and almost every member of council took in meeting with us to talk about this beforehand, to make sure that we were being thoughtful in this presentation. And again, this is just one tool we're trying to sort of set up to help us do the thing we've been trying to do for 100 years.
Okay. We'll revisit this in a more formal setting later, but I'm going to close this public hearing of the New Community
Authority.
Authority public hearing.
Thank you, Council.